It started out like any normal day, except I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I went to check my mailbox, important letters and packages seemed to disappear without a trace. At first, I thought it was just a mistake, maybe a mix-up at the post office. But then it kept happening, week after week. The same missing bills, notices, and even small deliveries. That's when I realized this wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was deliberately taking my mail, and I had a pretty good idea of who it was. You see, I live near a woman we all know as the HOA Karen. She's the type who thinks the entire neighborhood revolves around her rules, even when you don't live under her hoe. She'd already complained about my lawn, my parking, and even the color of my mailbox. So, when I noticed her lingering around the street a little too often, my gut told me she was the one behind the missing mail. Now, mail theft isn't just nosy behavior. It's serious, and I knew I couldn't let it slide. But instead of confronting her directly and giving her the drama she probably wanted, I decided to take a different approach. Something that would leave her completely caught off guard, with no way to talk her way out of it. The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. If she wanted to play games, I was going to make sure she walked right into a trap she'd never forget. And trust me, when the moment came, her reaction was priceless. But before I reveal exactly what I did and how it all unfolded, let's just say, this time, the HOA Karen picked the wrong mailbox. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together. This wasn't just random mail going missing. It was always the things that mattered most. Utility bills, official notices, even a package I had been waiting on for weeks. Strangely enough, the junk mail and flyers were always still there, almost like someone was being selective about what to take. That's when it hit me. Whoever was behind this wanted to cause trouble, not just steal. Living next to HOA Karen, I'd seen her pull stunts before. She had a reputation for stretching her power beyond the actual HOA boundaries. Neighbors whispered about how she'd filed complaints over the smallest things, like a garden gnome being too distracting or kids leaving their bikes in the driveway for 10 minutes. She seemed to thrive on conflict, almost like she needed it to feel in control. That made the idea of her sneaking around and taking mail seem not only possible but likely. Still, I didn't want to accuse her without proof. If I was wrong, it would only fuel her need for drama. But every time I caught her walking her dog near my house, she slowed down just enough to glance at my mailbox. It wasn't obvious to someone passing by, but I noticed. And once you notice a pattern, it's impossible to unsee it. Meanwhile, the missing mail was starting to cause real problems. Late fees were piling up, and I nearly missed an important notice about my property taxes. It was more than just an inconvenience. It was creating chaos in my life. And the more it happened, the more I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. That's when I decided I needed a plan. Something quiet, clever, and undeniable. Because if she really was the one stealing my mail, I wanted the truth to come out in a way she couldn't escape. Once I made up my mind to catch her, the conflict became bigger than just missing letters. It was about trust in my own neighborhood. Every time I stepped outside, I wondered if I was being watched. I started noticing little things that seemed off, a set of footprints in the dirt near my mailbox after a night of rain, or the sound of a car door closing late in the evening when the street was usually quiet. Whether it was paranoia or not, it added to the unease that was already building. Neighbors began mentioning their own issues too. One family said their water bill never arrived, while another complained that a package was left open on their porch. None of them had proof, but the timing made me wonder if this was all connected. Could it be that HOA Karen wasn't just targeting me, but keeping tabs on others as well? If so, her need for control might have been stronger than anyone thought. On top of that, I had another subplot unfolding with my work. I was waiting on an important contract in the mail, and its delay nearly cost me a project I'd been chasing for months. That hit me hard because it showed how these missing letters weren't just an annoyance. They were changing the course of my daily life. It felt like someone else was holding the strings, and I was being forced to react. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't going to be solved with a simple conversation. I needed to outsmart her, but at the same time, I had to stay calm. One wrong move could give her the upper hand, and that was the last thing I wanted. With every day that passed, the tension grew heavier. I couldn't shake the thought that at any moment, my mailbox might be opened again. I started checking it more often, sometimes twice or even 3 times a day, just to make sure nothing else had disappeared. Each time I lifted the lid, my heart raced, wondering what I'd find or wouldn't find. The not knowing was worse than anything. That's when I decided it was time to put my plan into motion. I prepared the mailbox carefully, making sure it looked completely ordinary from the outside. Nothing about it gave away what was hidden inside, but I knew if someone tried to tamper with it, I would know immediately. It was my way of creating undeniable proof, something that couldn't be brushed off as coincidence or blamed on the post office. The days that followed were some of the longest I've ever lived. I caught myself listening for the sound of footsteps on the gravel, the jingle of her dog's collar, or the squeak of my mailbox hinge. Each small noise made me freeze, waiting to see if this would finally be the moment. The suspense wasn't just in my head, it hung over my entire routine, from making coffee in the morning to locking the door at night. Meanwhile, I started noticing how HOA Karen seemed more confident, almost smug. She waved at neighbors, lingered on the sidewalk, and even made a point of walking past my house more often than usual. It was as if she thought she'd already gotten away with everything, and that only fueled my determination. And then, late one evening, when the street was quiet and the sky was fading into darkness, I finally heard it, the sound I had been waiting for. I held my breath as the faint creak of the mailbox echoed in the still night air. My heart pounded, knowing this was the moment I had been waiting for. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of footsteps fading away, I heard whispers, 2 voices, not one. That stopped me cold. Up until now, I had convinced myself that this was all the work of HOA Karen alone. But if she wasn't acting alone, what did that mean? I leaned closer to the window, careful not to give myself away. One voice was unmistakably hers, sharp and bossy, but the other was quieter, almost nervous. It sounded like a younger man, maybe a relative or even someone she had convinced to help her. That second voice sent a chill down my spine, because it meant this wasn't just about one person meddling. It was bigger, more calculated, and I had no idea how far it went. The next morning confirmed my fears. A neighbor stopped me on the sidewalk and mentioned they saw HOA Karen walking late at night with someone who didn't live in the neighborhood. Suddenly, the missing bills, the open packages, the strange timing, it all took on a new meaning. This wasn't just about control anymore. It felt like a plan, something with layers I hadn't considered before. Now the stakes were higher. If more than one person was involved, catching them would be even trickier. Any mistake could ruin my chance at proof, and worse, it could make them even bolder. My simple trap might not be enough anymore. The suspense was almost unbearable. I knew the confrontation was coming, but now I was bracing for something much bigger than I originally imagined. That night, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I set myself up quietly, making sure the mailbox was ready for anyone who tried to tamper with it. My heart raced as the hours passed, every sound outside magnified by the silence of the house. And then, just like before, I heard the hinge squeak. I moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, and finally caught sight of them. It was exactly who I suspected, HOA Karen, with a flashlight in one hand and the mailbox open in the other. Standing just behind her was the younger man I'd heard before. I stepped forward, and the moment they saw me, everything froze. Karen tried to act casual, but the evidence was undeniable, my mail clutched in her hand. Her companion looked panicked, shifting his weight like he wanted to run. I didn't have to say much. The proof was right there, and my plan had worked better than I expected. What she didn't know was that I had already set up a small recording device earlier, and it captured the entire scene clearly. There was no way for her to twist this or blame it on someone else. But just when I thought the conflict had reached its peak, the real twist came out. The younger man wasn't just some random accomplice. He was her nephew, and he admitted right there that she had been pressuring him to help keep the neighborhood in line. It wasn't about stealing valuables. It was about control, intimidation, and making sure people felt powerless. That truth stunned everyone who eventually heard it. The conflict I thought was only between me and Karen revealed something deeper, a pattern she had been pushing on others for far longer than I realized. And in that moment, the entire neighborhood finally saw her for who she really was. The fallout from that night spread quickly through the neighborhood. Word traveled faster than I expected, and by the next morning, nearly everyone knew what had happened. People who had kept quiet before began sharing their own stories, missing mail, odd complaints, and strange encounters that suddenly made sense. It was like a puzzle finally coming together, and the picture wasn't pretty. For the first time, HOA Karen didn't have the power to twist the story. The proof was there, and the truth was undeniable. Her nephew's confession turned out to be the breaking point. Neighbors were shocked, but also relieved to finally understand why things had felt so unsettled. Some even admitted they had been too nervous to speak up, worried about becoming her next target. But now that everything was in the open, there was a sense of unity. People started looking out for each other, checking their mailboxes, and making sure no one felt isolated. What had once been a street full of suspicion slowly began to feel like a real community again. As for me, the missing bills were eventually sorted out, and the late fees were forgiven once the situation was explained. It wasn't easy, but it showed how important it is to keep records and stand your ground when something doesn't feel right. The whole ordeal reminded me that sometimes the quiet battles in our daily lives, like protecting your privacy and your mail, are just as important as the bigger ones. In the end, Karen's influence faded, and the neighborhood learned to see through her tactics. What started as stolen letters turned into a lesson about standing firm, trusting your instincts, and protecting what's yours. And for once, I could finally check my mailbox without looking over my shoulder.